Meeting to order. Introduction of late items. We have any? Nope. Approval for the agenda. Recommended resolution that the agenda for the regular meeting for council on September 7th, 2021 be approved. Do I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none. Motion approved. Minutes of the previous meeting. Recommended resolution that the minutes from the regular council meeting being held on August 17th, 2021 be adopted. Do I have a motion?
I'll move that.
Second.
I'll second.
Okay.
Discussion? We just have that one little amendment to make. Since I'm pretty sure John McDonald is not my father. Thank you. And do we have approved? All in favor? All in favor? Motion approved. Petition delegations. We have Sydney Rankmore from Urban Systems to present the draft on the community plan. Sydney, the floor is yours.
Hello.
Hi.
Nice to see you all again. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for
I'm
being
excited.
here.
Oh, no problem. Excited to talk about the draft plan, what we've come up with, and hear your thoughts and comments on it. So I'll just share my screen for this presentation. Go. Great. And feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have questions or comments or clarifications at any time throughout the presentation. So I'll just run through the agenda of what I'm going to be talking about. We'll revisit the project timeline. We'll review the draft official community plan. We'll pause for some questions, comments, or any revisions, and then we will discuss the upcoming engagement, which is next week. So you have seen this before on a few occasions, so I just wanted to revisit it briefly, talk about what we've done and what we still have to come. So phase 1 was background research in the spring, which we completed. Phase 2 was preliminary engagement in the spring and early summer. This included the council and staff workshop, the community survey, the stakeholder meetings, and then in phase 3 through July and August, we conducted the public engagement in person in Sayward. And following that, we drafted the OCP and we met with staff to confirm the OCP. And then we are in phase 4 currently, so August and September. We're preparing for the second public engagement. This is the council update, and then we will submit the final draft after following the public engagement. And then we'll move into phase 5, which will be the approvals process. So the plan overview, just quickly run through the different sections. So part 1 is the introduction, so includes the purpose of an OCP and important partnerships. So while it's not all encompassing the section of every single partnership of the villages, the section highlights that Sayward can't accomplish many of these goals alone and will need to work in partnership and collaboration. Part 2 is laying out the vision for the future, which includes sustainability, a section on sustainability and how it's incorporated into the entire plan rather than a standalone policy section. And then the priorities as identified through the engagement process that was used to guide policy creation, and we'll go through those in a couple slides. Part 3 is the policy framework. So this is the section where we outline the policy, which I will also get into a bit later in the presentation. Part 4 is land use plan. So this details the land use designations and the development permit areas, which I'll also get into a little bit later. And then part 5 discusses the implementation plan. So to ensure that all policies plans, policies, and strategies developed by the village are consistent with the OCP, and discussion of regular monitoring of the plan to ensure it's still in line with village priorities. And this section also outlines some plans and initiatives identified throughout the plan that may be worth pursuing for the village in the future. And this section is really intended for future funding applications. So you can point to this to be like, we identified that we want to do this plan or this strategy and are seeking funding to do so. Any questions so far about the structure of the plan? Great. Move on. So these are the guiding priorities as identified through the engagement, and we actually had this list up at the first public engagement in the gazebo. So it's really laying out the vision, and this is kind of how we developed the policy, was sticking to these priorities. So we want to preserve the small town lifestyle. We want to ensure that our community is built to last. We want to attract and retain new residents, including families, youth, and seniors. We want a healthy local economy that provides opportunities for our citizens. We want resource industries to invest in and work with our community. We want to protect and showcase our natural environment. We want to welcome visitors to our community. We want to do our part to address climate change, and we want open and inclusive communication and decision making. So part 3 is the policy framework. So I'm going to run through, these are the 12 policy sections of the plan. And I won't go through each individual policy because we would be here all night. And I'll just highlight some high-level direction for each of the sections and run through each of them, and then we'll stop at the end and see if there's any questions or comments about any policy or section in specific. So firstly is Indigenous relationships and partnerships. So this section's really some policy direction is recognition of Indigenous rights and interests and the village's commitment to truth and reconciliation, and pursuit of opportunities to share Indigenous history and culture within the village. General guidelines for how to pursue a relationship with Comox First Nation and other nations in the area. The second section is citizen engagement and community leadership. So the two kind of sections that's broken out into is citizen engagement and then transparent and effective governance. So a lot of the language is around collaboration with community groups and local organizations, and providing opportunities for professional development and training for staff and council, and working with regional district and the area aid director on a lot of these policies specifically. The community health and well-being section is split up into 5 sections. It's quite a large section, so I won't go too into it, but it's youth and family support is one, senior support, social and cultural development, healthcare, and education. The 4th section is economic development. So this is split up into resource industry, tourism, and local businesses. So for resource industry, the policy direction points towards working with WFP and Island Timberlands, promoting sustainable resource extraction, and pursuing harbor improvements and hiring local talent for the resource industry. The tourism section is focused on attracting tourism operators to establish themselves in Saywards and attracting visitors to the Sayward area. The local businesses section is centered around supporting establishment of certain services such as retail or restaurant, and ways to support local entrepreneurs and businesses. The 5th section is, I guess I'll pause here. Is there any questions so far?
Councillor Craig.
Yes, I actually have 2 questions. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Yeah.
First question is, as far as part 3, section 1, Indigenous relationships and partnerships, did you entertain any of our First Nations in your consultations for any input into this section?
It's a good question. We did reach out to Comox First Nation, and they didn't seem too interested in talking to the project team, but had expressed interest in speaking to council and speaking to staff. And so we kind of directed it towards Anne to further pursue that relationship. And I don't know, Anne, if you want to answer the question further about your engagement with them on this subject.
CAO, you're muted.
Thank you. How about now?
Now's
Can you
good.
hear me now? Good.
Yeah.
Thank you. So through the chair to answer Councillor Craig, the Comox First Nation indicated very early on in the process when we awarded the contract that their preference would be to have for us to work staff to staff until it was in a draft form, and then to work with the elected officials through the formal consultation. And so what we've asked them is if they would be interested in a community to community forum to do the formal consultation. And they've indicated at a staff level that they're interested. And so now we're trying to form up a date that will work for them sometime in October. And so that's the preference that they had, was for that formal consultation at the end, and that the staff be involved at this level now. But there are other First Nations as well that we'll be wanting to consult with in the Campbell River area that don't have, they have overlapping traditional territories, but don't have the same presence that Comox does.
Thank you.
Just a quick follow-up question. On the same question, except for under economic development, did you consult with Western Forest Products or MOE, which is our two only real economic providers in this community in this report?
Yes. Sorry, can you clarify who MOE is?
MOE is a fish farm in Campbell River and North Island. It's,
Okay.
Yeah,
we didn't get a chance to talk to them, and if that's something that you think would be helpful at this stage, we can definitely reach out to them. We had discussion with Western Forest Product and Island Timberlands and Couverton, which is the real estate arm of Island Timberlands, and yeah, a couple other industry partners. But yeah, we didn't reach out to MOE, and we definitely can if with the draft to see if they're interested in having a conversation as well.
thank you very much for answering the questions.
Yeah. Any other questions at this time? Great. I'll press on. So the fifth section of the policy framework is focused on public spaces. And this is kind of, there's some general policy, and then there's parks policy, and then there's active transportation policy within this section. So the general policy is really focused on accessibility of existing new public spaces and creative programming of the spaces to ensure that they get used. The parks policy is focused on providing adequate parkland to residents and providing access to that parkland, and some language about potentially off-leash dog area and other specific amenities. The active transportation section was focused on expansion of the trail network, increasing accessible transportation options, so walking paths that are accessible for all residents, improving general walkability of the community, and the creation of potentially a multimodal hub within the community to encourage more active transportation use. So number 6 is growth. This section kind of, I think growth is was a big topic during the engagement. So we're really purposeful about, talking about incremental development in the policy language. So phased approaches and not overwhelming residents. Approved development where there's existing servicing capacity, so it doesn't put additional pressure on infrastructure. Approval of developments that fills specific service gaps, for example, restaurants or retail services, and ensuring development contributes to community amenities generally. Then we'll move into the housing section. So kind of 3 general buckets that this fell in. So affordable housing, so that was really focused on creation of a diverse housing stock, adequate rental housing supply, similar types of policies but potentially like providing policy surrounding those short-term rentals or vacation rentals, that kind of language. And then supportive housing, so providing housing and support services for those with disabilities or seniors. Section 8 is infrastructure. Some general policy that it was focused on asset management and maintenance, and then the creation of new infrastructure. So one large section of the infrastructure is kind of the feasibility of the sewer and water system, and potentially, well, expanding that to fit the population or future population. Regular maintenance of existing infrastructure, floodplain management policy, and innovative infrastructure solutions moving forward, such as green infrastructure. I can pause here if there's any questions about those sections. Great, I'll keep going. So the next one is agricultural and local food security. So this was really focused on around expansion of the local food system. One of the policies is about the potential creation of a centralized food hub. So having the city kind of endorse a farmer's market or something like that, or just even a centralized place where you can find information about local food producers in the village and the valley. And encouraging urban agriculture by providing spaces for community gardens or greenhouses. Natural assets, so this is protection of environmentally sensitive areas, protection of the Salmon River estuary, providing adequate access to green space, and then ensuring healthy ecosystems and wildlife populations. Those are kind of the four main goals of the natural asset section. Community safety, so this was split up between emergency preparedness and then first responders, and then some general policy language about community safety. So a lot of language about collaborating with the regional district as they manage emergency services. Ensuring proper emergency preparedness, so there's a few plans such as like a marine response plan, spill response plan suggested, some language like that. And then providing resources for first responders within the community. And the final section is climate action. So this is aimed around reducing the village's impact on climate change. And the two sections within climate action are mitigation and adaptation. The mitigation section has some policy surrounding active transportation and renewable energy. And the adaptation section is water consumption and protection and enhancement of green infrastructure generally. Yeah, so that concludes the policy framework. Are there any questions?
No, ma'am.
Great. Right. And I thought I'd just kind of run through two policies and really highlight we're purposeful with kind of the active language of the policies. I just wanted to kind of run through how they're structured as well. So this one here, the first one is, so the section is Indigenous relationships and partnerships. And within that, there's a goal. So Sayward has a positive working relationship with the Comox First Nation and Indigenous groups in the area. So that's the goal that we'd be working towards. And then there's several policies below it. And I just picked out this one as it's had some active language. And similarly, a little bit different, the community health and well-being section has several subheadings, like I mentioned. So 3.3.1 is youth and family support. And the goal within that subsection is the community is an attractive place for young adults, young families, youth, and young adults. And the policy is to prioritize support for new developments and businesses that create opportunities for youth and young families in Sayward. So part 4, the land use plan. So through this, we'll review the land use designations as they're set out in the draft OCP and the development permit areas. So this is the land use designation map. This was actually at the public engagement back in July. So there's 8 land use designations that you can see on this map. You can kind of just run through them quickly. So the residential core is the orange, the light orange right in the middle, and it's the existing residential area. The village center is dark blue, and it's centrally located in a broad mix of commercial, residential, civic, and institutional uses, and kind of the heart of the community. The infrastructure reserve is those dotted lines filled in with gray, and their area set aside for municipal infrastructure expansion and improvement. Parks and green space is green, and that's area set aside for public parks, ecological reserves, green belts, and outdoor recreation. So the estuary is included in that as well. The rural is the light yellow at the bottom there, and that's low density rural residential uses and natural resource extraction. The future community expansion is the kind of orangey red behind the residential core. And that's area just designated for future growth of the community. The gateway is the light pink, and that's a mix of residential, community, and commercial uses. And then the Kelsey Bay Special Planning Area is the purple up in Kelsey Bay, and that's area for community enhancement. And there's also a development concept to guide future land use in that area. So I'll go to that. There's a couple things about Kelsey Bay that we'll talk about. So this is the development concept that was also at the public engagement, and just kind of some general guidelines about Kelsey Bay and future expansion, and nothing set in stone, but just a concept that could be worked from initially. So yeah, it's got some of the commercial uses in the red hatched. The yellow is residential. There's a parking spot where it's a bit hard to see probably, but this is also in the plan as well if you want to take a bit of a closer look at the details of this map. Get into the development permit areas. So the first one is natural environments. So this, you'd have to seek a permit to develop in the identified areas shown here. And the goal of this permit area is to protect important water courses, habitats, and ecosystems from development. Development permit, here is the hazardous area development permit. This map includes the floodplain, steep slopes, and wildfire risk area, though I will note that the floodplain is not complete because we're still waiting for the updated floodplain mapping from McElhenney from the work that's been done with the village and the SRD. So this DPA is really intended to allow permitted use while keeping people and infrastructure safe from these potential hazards.
Thank you. One moment, please. CAO, you have a question?
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you, Mayor Baker. I just wanted to point out what a development permit is, a kind of a new tool. It's not in the current community plan. It's basically it's a step up from zoning. So in other words, in areas that are DP areas or development permit areas, it triggers a little bit of a discussion early. And so it's an alternative to zoning in the sense that it's not arbitrary. It doesn't say you can only do these things in this area. What it says is that you need to apply for a permit so that we can establish where you can do these things. So for example, in the riparian areas, which is the most common development permit area, I was going to say the olden days, before, it used to be that areas that were riparian or close to water were set back. So there was no opportunity for development to happen in that area that was set back. And now, as an alternative to having that arbitrary setback, what landowners have to hire a professional to identify the setback area. So development permits, as Sydney just said, provide a little bit more flexibility for use without this arbitrary zoning framework that applies to all properties equally, when we know that all properties are not the same when it comes to things like hazardous waste or hazardous conditions or flood areas, or there's a number of things that you can issue development permit areas for under the Local Government Act, but they have to be identified in the community plan. So I just wanted to give you that context around what they were.
Thank you.
Good.
The final development permit area is the Kelsey Bay development permit area. So the area that you see here, and similar to what Anne just mentioned, the DPA provides guidelines for what can be built here. It's not supposed to be restrictive. It's just supposed to allow some to work towards a common goal. So the one for Kelsey Bay would be enhancement of public space and establishing Kelsey Bay as a destination. So focusing on uses and development that accomplishes these goals as set out in the DPA. So we've come to the end and just wanted to talk about the public engagement. So it's next Thursday, September 16th from 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. at the Kelsey Recreation Center. Yeah, there will be a barbecue and there will be a chance for residents to review the draft OCP and provide comments before it goes for the approvals process. Yeah. Any questions at all?
Anyone from council? Councillor Craig?
Yeah, I just have a quick question, possibly for our CAO, actually. There are 4 houses at the end of Brazeau Bay. Are those outside of the village boundaries, or is that within the village boundary? And if it's within the village boundary, are they included in this map?
I'm sorry, Chair, Councillor Craig, can you tell me where that is again? You said Brazeau Bay, is that around the point?
Sure, it is actually. It's right up the road where Macadam's development properties. You just keep going up that road and it kind of loops and twists and turns around till it comes down to a beach area on the water.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm pulling up our GIS. I'm reasonably certain that's outside the area, but I'm going to look up the properties because I don't know off the top. But it doesn't look to me like there's any properties north of where Mike's property is that are included within municipal boundaries. So I guess I can check that further, but I'm not sure exactly what properties. Maybe you can come by and show me on the road. Are you talking about Prior Sacked Road properties? There's a road there called Prior Sacked Road.
Actually, Councillor Polson and I just took a drive there the other day. Perhaps she can chime in and explain it a little bit better than I can. Councillor Polson?
Thanks, Councillor Craig. Yes, we did take a drive down there and it goes up over the hill and then comes down right to the waterfront level. And there are a group of houses down there. Now, I don't know if it's privately owned or, if it's part of Sayward or, but it does certainly does have an impact on the road usage that accesses Mr. Adama's property. I would have thought that it is part of the village of Sayward.
No, I think if you go to our GIS and put on the ortho photo, which I have just done, you'll see that there are no properties within the village boundaries north of the RV park that's there right now. I'm not entirely certain of which properties you're talking about, though, but you can see our village boundaries. And I think you're talking about some properties on the Prior Sacked Road, which goes further west and north, but outside the town boundaries. So maybe when we're in person together, we can do this over the phone. Maybe after this meeting, we can go on the map and see it.
Sure, I can also take you for a drive up there too. No problem.
That would be fine, but really the thing is to look at the village boundaries on our GIS map. You'll see that there's nothing north and west of the Fears property.
Thank you.
But I'm not entirely certain of what you're talking about, so we'll follow up together.
Is there any other questions from council? No. Sydney, thank you very much for coming today. We appreciate it. All the best. Good luck for the 16th.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and if anybody has any additional comments or questions, feel free to send me an email, or pass the message along somehow. Thank you for having me tonight.
Thank you. It looks like our CAO has a question. You're muted as well? Nope. Oh, hands up, hands up. Okay,
Thank you.
no
I'm
question
done.
for the CEO. Okay, thank you very much, Sydney.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, on to number 6, correspondence. The correspondence A through C be received. Do I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second? I'm
I'll
sorry,
second
go
that.
ahead and second.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Do a discussion? Opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. I'm sorry, CAO, you have your hand up?
Thank you, Mayor Baker. I wanted to point out that item C is the draft correspondence that you had asked staff to draft regarding the regional fire service study.
Yes.
So perhaps if there's any changes or revisions, now would be a good time to talk about that. Or if people haven't had a chance to go through it in detail, we could look at people sending some comments by way of email.
I don't know, I had a chance to go through it and I'm fine with it. Did everybody have a chance to go through it? Council?
Yes. Yes.
Any recommended changes?
I will email some changes that I feel are warranted on my personal view at a later date.
Okay, we want to get that off as soon as possible because they're going to be moving forward. So whoever has any questions or comments or revisions, please send that in to Ann directly. Sorry, CEO, you had your hand up again?
No.
Nope. Okay, so the correspondence A through C be received. Do we have, we had a motion, we had a second. Any other further discussion? Opposed? Hearing none, carried. Council reports? None. Reports of committees? None. Mayor's report? None. Unfinished business? None at this time. And staff reports on the permissive tax exemptions 2022. CAO?
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Baker. I believe there are 2 members on council who are on the board of Sayward Futures who are required to recuse themselves at this point.
Yes, that's me.
Yeah. And also
That
Councillor
would
Craig.
also be me, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll have you sign out and then rejoin the meeting. We'll give you a call when the discussion is ended. Okay,
Sign right out, leave the meeting.
yes, please.
Goodbye.
Bye.
So long.
See you
Very well.
soon. Tom, you're no longer involved with Futures?
No,
Nope.
I resigned as a director a while back.
Okay, sorry, Councillor Tinsley. Okay, CAO?
Thank you. I'd like to, if there's any questions about the process for permissive tax exemptions, we could have the CFO give you the legislative requirements and the process. Or would you prefer to speak directly about the recommendations? Essentially, I think this is a regular occurrence and it's something that happens on a regular basis. So the Act is pretty clear about timing. So we do have to have our bylaw in place by the end of October. So there is some timing. I think council has to consider whether or not, given the status of Sayward Futures financial picture, and given the relationship with private business, whether or not giving a tax exemption is in fact a form of a subsidy or a benefit or a grant to the business. It's hard to justify it given the financial demands on the village, a small number of taxpayers. And but however, it is a provision in the Act that council has some discretionary authority on. So I'll just leave it at that. And if you have any questions, of course, the CFO can answer the questions on the process and on the terms, and we can discuss the recommendations as well.
Does anyone from council have any questions on the process? Would you like the CFO to explain? Councillor Tinsley, you're good?
Yes.
Councillor Kirschner?
Yes, I'm good.
Okay. So I think we need to discuss the application. CAO brings up a good point where MOE is involved with the dock and Seaward Futures is in a good financial position. So Tom, you have a better background on that. Councillor Tinsley, go ahead.
Trying to get my hand down. Sorry, here we go. I can do it. No, I can't. Anyway, hand goes down. There we are. Sorry about that. The financial position is significant, as mentioned by the CAO, in terms of a reserve that the private company is required for the maintenance of the dock. And I totally respect the work that's being done by the volunteers and the community. But I would say that it is a fine balance that we have to look at, and perhaps going with the recommendation of the resolution that the Futures Board appear and provide more information around why we would want to move forward on that at this time. I know that part of the large sum of money that is available is designed to retain that wharf, which is at the end of its life. So there's a lot of work to be done there. So some considerations, and I'm not sure if the council can balance that versus the private interests. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kirschner, do you have any comments?
Had to turn my mic on. No, I don't.
Okay. No, I think it would be fair to have to request the Futures Board to appear September 21st and to present their need for the tax abatement. So I think that's the direction that we'll go. So recommended resolution that the report on the permissive tax exemption for 2022 be received for information and discussion. Do I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second,
I'll second it.
discussion? Opposed? Hearing none, carried. And that council consider requesting Seaward Futures Board to appear at the September 21st meeting to present their need for a tax exemption. Do I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second it. I'm just suggesting that it's not, we're going to consider it. We're actually asking them. Sorry.
Correct. No, we'll do, so on the second, so under discussion, consider will have to be, excuse me, removed.
Reworded.
Okay. So we'll remove consider. And anybody opposed? Hearing none. Motion carried as revised. So we can contact Councillor Paulson and Councillor Craig and have them rejoin the meeting, please. Maybe we'll take a 5-minute recess until they can get back on. Okay, we can, this meeting is being recorded. It's just going to be a minute. You guys got back on pretty quick.
We're just in the office there.
We lost Councillor Kirschner for just a couple of minutes there. So it's 5 minutes gone by. Okay, call the meeting back to order. And CAO updates and staff reports. CAO?
Thank you, Mayor Baker. This is the update on the current initiatives report that council asked for on a monthly basis a while ago that is currently on our website and updated on a monthly basis for the day-to-day kind of things, as well as some big major initiatives. I'll just quickly go through. We have completed the request for quotes for the 4 generators. At the last meeting, council supported the request to use surplus funds from the sewage reserve fund to cover the costs of the 4 generators. So we had an RFQ posted. We had 4 bids. They ranged from about 177,000 to 322,000. Of course, we picked the lowest bid, and a firm out of Qualicum Beach will be starting the work and has promised to have those generators installed by the end of November. So that's good. You may have noticed that there's some construction underway at the Sewage Lagoon Pond, where the dock is being constructed right now to provide for the boat launch so that staff can get safely in and out of the boat or the pond to complete the required maintenance for the aerator and the pump. The Newcastle Dam is well underway to deconstruct that dam and to construct a new weir. Northwest Hydraulics and Barry and Vale NHC is on site carrying out the work, and they expect to be finished within the next couple of weeks. And so far it's gone quite smoothly. There's been no surprises, no hiccups, and we expect that work to be done within the next couple of weeks. I think I mentioned to council at the last meeting, there's some interest in the mobile home park that's been for sale for some time at the onset to the community. The new owner has some plans. We haven't really seen what they're proposing, but we've heard that they would like to replace the mobile homes with modular homes at some point. You'll notice that the first trailer has been, I wouldn't say abandoned, but the tenant has left. And the owner of the park is now completing the work with WorkSafe BC in order to do the hazardous assessment in order to obtain a demolition permit to remove that mobile home. And so that's why it looks the way it does now when you see it. They're in the process of getting that hazardous assessment work done. It usually involves things like asbestos and lead paint. We've received the draft ticketing bylaw back from our lawyer. We'll be bringing it forward to the September 21st meeting for council to look at. And in the meantime, we'll be submitting it to the RCMP to see if it meets their requirements to be able to employ the RCMP to issue tickets on those occasions, hopefully rare when we need to do that. So I've said here it'll come back in September 21st, but in fact, it'll come back when we hear back from the RCMP, who will probably vet it through their own legislative team. As you know, we've been working with Western Forest Products to address a number of issues. One of them was noise, another is dust, and now, of course, there's the water issue. So we're still hopeful to set that up in the next couple of weeks. We had invited Brad McRae, who is the Director of Corporate Relations, to attend tonight. And at one point, he was planning to attend, but I guess his schedule got changed a bit and he was unable to come. However, he is working on arranging for a tour for all of council for the log sort so that we can discuss their water needs, because as we'll find out later on this evening when we review the application to rezone 18 Sayward Road, the water is the big problem, and if we can have some buy-in from Western Forest on the water issue with respect to the log sorts uses, again, as Sydney mentioned earlier, there's not very many things we can do on our own. We need to form partnerships with some of these key stakeholders, so hopefully that will come together. I mentioned the C2C, the Community to Community Forum Grant, which you'll see in an application or a resolution later on here, I think, to to go forward with the application for the C2C, which we'll be going forward to see if we can use that. I don't know how that will look because Comox First Nation is still meeting remotely. And I'm not sure if they'll be available to come to Sayward for the meeting, but we'll have more details on that in the next little while. And of course, the drainage plan for the McMillan Drive, you'll see that there's already some equipment in the Mount Kazam Park. We were able to get all the permitting in place to be able to go through with one of the 5 recommendations in the short-term list for this fall. So in fact, they'll be pulling out all the gravel in those drainage channels on each side of the ballpark because it's the gravel that ends up causing the backlog of water. It's one of the many things that causes it, but that's one of the things we hope will help. And so that work is meant to start this week and hopefully finish also this week. We've been required to have a registered professional bio on site during the 2 days work. So you'll see a bit of action down there in the park. The study for the salmon and the white ribbon flood hazard mapping study is wrapping up. We expect for the team that's leading that, McElhaney, the SRD, myself, and other staff with the SRD, to bring that forward to a public engagement sometime in October, by the sounds of it. And so I don't think there's anything surprising on that study. I guess the most surprising thing to me was the projection through climate change of 20% more rainfall in the winter months, which potentially leads to 20% more water being available to cause flooding issues. So that's one thing.
I'm sorry, CAO, can I interrupt for a sec? Sorry to interrupt. Councillor Kirschner, can I get you just to turn your video off, please?
Video?
Yes. Just for a few minutes. Oh, sorry, you're muted as well. Okay, sorry, go ahead, CAO.
Okay, thank you. The last item on this list, I think, is the bylaw compliance work. Council will realize that we were directed to put a notice on title for the 2 properties that were built without building permits. We were also in the position of having to issue stop work orders because the parties were able to hook up to the water system. And of course, we require them to have a building permit to address the deficiencies in the building. And then we can turn on the water, and there's a requirement for deposit. We want to make sure that it's done properly and that it doesn't contaminate the water for the downstream users by some other kind of hookup. So we expect that to be resolved fairly quickly. I've been in talks with the structural engineering firm in Campbell River, who the owner, the previous owner, Bob Van Brocklin, had hired to complete some of the work. And there seems to be some legal issues among the parties. That's what's holding up the work. It's not really ourselves. As soon as they issue us a report that shows that the properties have been assessed and we can issue a building permit for them to address the deficiencies, we'll be able to turn on the water. But we can't turn on the water until that time. So that is the last item on the list here. And I think unless council has any other questions, that's the update on the rolling spreadsheet. There's a few other things in the actual list here, but those are the key initiatives. So thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from council? Recommended resolution that council receive the staff report and update for information purposes, pardon me. Do I have a motion?
I move.
I'll move that.
Second?
I'll second if I missed that.
Discussion? Opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. Also that the staff be directed to apply. We haven't gotten there yet. CAO?
Yes, this is a good place for this resolution because it doesn't warrant its own report, but basically the deadline to apply is September 10th to host a community forum this fall. And in preliminary discussions with staff at KFN, they've indicated they would be interested in that, and their best time would be sometime at the end of October. So we're trying to firm up that date now because they're pretty busy. So if council's supportive of that, we'd go ahead with applying for this.
Okay, so that council will be directed to apply for the $5,000 community-to-community grant to host the C2C forum in order to consult with the Comox First Nations on the updated community plan. Do I have a motion, please?
I
So-
move.
Second,
I'll second that.
thank you. Discussion? Councillor Craig?
Yeah, I have a question about that. Is this forum going to be an in-person gathering, or is this going to be via Zoom or online or other web-based forums?
CAO, you mentioned before that they're looking at doing virtually. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm waiting to hear back from the Comox First Nation on. I think they're still meeting virtually. I'd be surprised if they were willing to come, but I don't know. That's what we're waiting to hear. But so far, all of their meetings are still remote. So, but we'll follow up on that, and I can let council know about that. We could do a hybrid model where they maybe send 2 or 3 members, and we have 2 or 3 members, and then the rest are on hybrid on Teams. We don't really know yet. I think it's quite unlikely that it would be a full open meeting with all members of both elected officials from both agencies there. I don't think that would happen at this time.
Follow-up question?
Councillor Craig?
If it is an online Zoom meeting or other internet meeting, why would we need $5,000 to host that?
Well, that's the maximum we're allowed to apply for. Generally, that covers the food, and it covers the invitations, any of the paperwork, any of the printing costs that we use. I've organized several in the past, and we've always come close to that number. Again, this year, I don't know what we'll do. We might actually arrange for food to be delivered. I don't know. We haven't got into that yet. So once we get into that, what we're required to do is submit a budget as part of our application for the grant, and the maximum is 5,000, but we don't need to apply for the full 5. Just thinking about it before, I thought it might be nice for us to maybe arrange for food to be delivered, because so much of these forums is a social thing. There's the sharing of food and that sort of thing, but we honestly haven't talked about that yet at the staff level to see what the preference would be. But what's council's view on that?
Well, I think if it's going to be virtually, it would be a good gesture on our part to have food delivered to them for where they are, and with a gift and so on and so forth, as the ceremony provides. That's my thought. Councillor Tinsley, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would agree with that. If this is the maximum grant, we want to apply for that grant and then work with it. We're in changing times and all sorts of things, and see what a budget would fit the grant. As you mentioned, it's got to be reasonable for the occasion, whether virtual or partially virtual, and go from there. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I agree with Councillor Tinsley.
Thank you. Councillor Craig, do you have anything to add?
I would say that if it's a virtual meeting, that requesting $5,000 is a waste of taxpayer money.
Okay, thank you. So as it is, this directly apply for the $5,000 community-to-community grant, C2C form with Comox First Nation, updated our community plan. That was part of the discussion. So do we have opposed? Councillor Craig is opposed. Anyone else? Nope. Then motion carried. Updated official community plan, review of the draft of the OCP. Recommended resolution that council receive the draft of the OCP. Do I have a motion, please? Second? Discussion? Counselor Tinsley, you have your hand up.
Sorry, it's down now.
CAO, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. That was from a minute ago when I just wanted to question Councillor Craig's comment about applying. Our budget may not be for 5,000. That's the maximum. So we have to compile a budget in discussing it with staff. So I just wanted to let you know that it wouldn't be necessarily 5. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion on the OCP draft. Opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. Also, that council direct any required change to the draft. Motion? Motion, please.
I'm just trying to clarify that council require any change. So we're making a motion that we're going to require a change. I'm just trying to clarify that.
Yeah, I can see how the wording is. If we had any change, we would require them to change. So CAO, I think the wording on that is a little odd. I'm sorry, CAO, you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Mayor Baker. What the resolution is intended to do is provide an opportunity for council to make any amendments to the draft. So if council doesn't want to make any amendments at this time, then, you know, that's fine. It's just the way it is. So it's just in there in case you wanted to make changes. So.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll move on from that. So we do not need a motion on that one. Thank you. And that the plan be approved by council to go forward to the September 16th public engagement event. Do I have a motion, please?
I'll move that.
Second?
I'll second it.
Discussion? Opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. In the application to rezone 18 Sayward Road. So CAO?
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to welcome Mike Adama, who is the applicant for this project, and he is here with us tonight. I think, Mike, I saw you earlier. There you are. Yeah, thank you. So I think, Mike, I prepared a PowerPoint with Mike's help, and Mike, are you fine with me to go ahead with that, or did you want to start off?
No, you go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I'll need to request control of the screen and then show the PowerPoint. So, and please interrupt at any time. I just think it's easier than going through the staff report. It's there's a lot of details here. So now it might take a minute for us to get this here. Oh, my recall was not accepted. So I'm waiting for someone over there, Lisa, maybe to allow me to do this. Failing that, maybe staff, you have my PowerPoint. Can someone load it up? Because it's not, for some reason I'm not getting control here. The screen.
I think we're just having some technical issues, so we will bring it up out here.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, there's always technical issues, aren't there? Okay, thank you. So let's get started. This is there's a few slides here, but I'll try and go through them quickly. This is the area, of course, that's being rezoned. You can see the proposed development at the top, the Kelsey Bay Marina and the Sayward Road. And there, of course, we are in the village of Sayward, where that little arrow points to us. Next slide, please. I think I have, yeah, thank you. So the proposal is for 31 residential lots to be sold fee simple. And a 43 RV park, which will ownership of that will be retained by the applicant, Mike Adama, and they'll be leased as opposed to fee simple. The roads are also proposed to be retained and owned by the Stratacorp, and that is primarily because the road standards included in the Village of Sayward bylaws are seen to be excessive for what the applicant proposes to build on that site, which is quite steep and is mostly rock. So there's two questions. This is probably the first of several, maybe several subsequent phases. This is a portion of his land, I think 14 hectares out of as much as 25 hectares. So there may be, likely will be subsequent phases. And then there are two questions with respect to water and possibly traffic. Next slide, please. So this is just a picture that shows the entrance to Mike's property here. You can tell we're going down the end of Sayward Road, this right here on the left. Can you see my arrow? Probably not, eh? That entrance there on the left is the entrance to the site. Next slide, please. This shows the property that's proposed to be zoned. Now, because we have been hashing out the water, Mike has, we've been in discussions to talk about a phase development, as you heard Sydney talk earlier in the community plan discussion. And so now there's, what Mike is proposing is not, for this first phase, is not 33 lots, but 10 lots. So that would be lots 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 9, 10, 11, which is the 2 lots. And then the 2 lots down at the bottom here, 1 and 2, you'll see just above the text that says R1 zoning. Those 2 lots just above that, the large 1 and 2 lots, that is where the site of the pub is proposed. And then that other bigger site to the right of that is proposed for parking. So Mike is proposing to build some of the lots on Road B and Road A, as far up as, I guess, Lot 11 there. So we will provide another map which shows the lots that are proposed to be rezoned only as we get a little closer to council's decision-making phase. But he has agreed to reduce the number of lots in this first phase in order to give us some time to resolve some of the water issues. Next, so you can see here, these are the residential lots, and then the next slide is, of course, the RV park. Now, I just want to remind you that rezoning is really the road to achieving goals in the OCP. The OCP sets out the big framework. This is what we'd like the town to look like in 30 years. And the zoning changes are the step-by-step changes to get there. So in other words, one parcel might be identified as some future use, even though the current use is something different. That current use is still legal. But at some point, the owner may change the zone, apply to rezone that property to comply with the goals of the OCP. And that is how we get there, is that we change the zoning to allow the new use, but the new use has to set out and comply with the OCP. So while landowners have the right to apply for rezoning, and council has the obligation to hear that and consider it, the property can only be rezoned to comply with the OCP. And a public hearing is required, but a public hearing can be waived by council if in fact the rezoning does apply with the OCP. So of course, council made that decision some time ago when there was a slight zoning amendment for the mobile home park that complied with the official community plan, in which case you could waive the hearing if you so wished. So basically, this is just the hierarchy. The OCP sets out the big broad goals. The zoning sets out how you can use the property. Subdivision is the next phase, which provides for how the lots are laid out and the standards of the roads. And then the building permit sets out the terms for building on the site. So there's that sort of hierarchy of steps involved. And so we're at the stage now where rezoning, because this does comply with the OCP. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of chronology rather. The application was made in June of 2020. Councillors were sworn in December of that year, and there was a bit of a gap in that time where the minister had indicated that the village without a mayor and without 2 councillors was not allowed to proceed on things like this. So there's been a bit of a delay there while there was that gap. As well, the first formal review of the application that happened in February indicated that there was some missing information, and so the applicant was requested to provide some further requirements subject to that February the 4th council meeting. Next slide, please. So this is the list that council required. They asked that the applicant comply with the riparian area protection regulations. Now, we just talked a bit about development permits earlier. This is a good example of now with an OCP, prior to doing work in some of those areas, there would be and before there is a requirement to do the riparian area work, which Mike has now done. A traffic impact study was requested and completed by OnSite, as well as a preliminary assessment by the applicant himself. There's been some work done on the drainage and water management, but again, this is more at the subdivision phase for detail on the drainage. The same with the waste disposal and the street lighting. We asked some questions generally, but the details of that are in detail included at the subdivision phase. There's some requirement for, again, at subdivision for land to be set aside. As much as 5% of the overall land area should be set aside as parkland. That comes from the Local Government Act. Or the owner can calculate the value of the land and provide 5% in cash. We also asked for details about buffer areas so that there's some knowledge of how those RV parks and lots will be buffered. And that there'll be some information about RV campgrounds, standards and guidelines. Again, this can be dealt with at the subdivision phase in more detail. We also requested an archaeological study, which, and part of the consultation early on this application showed that the Weeweekai Nation had indicated an interest in being present during that work. So there'll be further archaeological work that will be required prior to subdivision. And then this area was shown as a development area in the OCP. So there was some requirements for the applicant to comply with us, which is exactly what we're doing now by asking for more information is what is implied with the development area so that it triggers that conversation so that council can achieve some mutual gains out of the project in an area that's identified as having some importance strategically, which this area of course does. Next slide, please. So again, the proposal is to rezone 14 hectares of the 24.53 hectare parcel and to provide for the 31 residential lots and the 43 lot RV park. The lots are proposed to be fully serviced by the Village of Sayward Water and Sewer, which the owner would have, of course, the responsibility to bring the servicing in from the property line. The strata ownership of the roads is going to be kept because the road standards in the subdivision bylaw by the Village of Sayward require certain road standards that they can't be met in terms of steepness and slopes and that sort of thing because it's mostly rock. And as I mentioned earlier, the RV park will be ownership will be retained by the developer and the lots will be available for rent. Next slide, please.
Sorry to interrupt. Councillor Kirschner, you had a question? You're muted.
Better. This goes way back to the start again. I had a question, but now it's turned up again, so I have to ask and show my ignorance. What does fee simple mean?
Fee simple is yeah, that's like what you own your property is fee simple, as opposed to where you rent the property or you have an interest in a condo that's part of a bigger group. But fee simple means that those lots will be sold, so they'll own the title just like any other private residential lot in town.
Thank you.
So in the current official community plan, this area is designated as a comprehensive development area 2. And this is why it's important for everybody to be comfortable with the policy framework in the official community plan, because it does require that any rezoning comply with these policy goals that are listed in the OCP. So the goal of the comprehensive development area 2 in the current official community plan is that that area is intended to provide mixed density residential and tourist accommodation services. The permitted uses include mixed density residential development, seniors housing, and tourism accommodation, including RV parks. Now, I think you can tell right away that this is kind of this is an old OCP, probably about 20-some years old. And it's kind of weaved its way into the zoning bylaw with including permitted uses. You don't normally see that in an OCP. They're more broad policies. So, but fortunately, there won't be any conflict between the new OCP, assuming council's happy with the draft. And then the proposed uses for here. But this, you don't normally see this kind of language anymore in an OCP. It's this kind of detailed level of uses is included in the zoning bylaw. However, we're lucky because it complies and everybody seems to be on the same page with the two OCPs. So this provides, the CDA designation provides for unique vistas across the Salmon Bay and the Johnstone Strait, and development should be oriented towards these views. That's the sort of policy framework you see in an OCP. And that's quite typical of what you would expect. So in other words, that promotes that kind of development. That really gives you the idea of what's intended to be happening in that area. And then the development area approval, the development approval information area in the OCP in part 5 of the current OCP is basically a provision that allows staff to work with property owners to bring about some desired uses and to mitigate negative impacts. So it's not meant to be like applying for a campground permit where you come in, you pay your $25 and you go. It's really meant to be an interactive process that we can work with the property owner to try and bring about some uses that reflect the goals of the OCP. In this case, this idea of creating this tourism area that's attractive and oriented towards the views of Salmon Bay. So that's the purpose of that section of the current OCP.
Councillor Craig.
Yes, I'm definitely sorry for interrupting. I do have a question. The bylaw number 308 of the OCP is technically current as of right now. And we're working on a new OCP to replace this one. And the question that I have is, since Mr. Adama's development application was previous to February, would not the current OCP be in effect and be applicable to his bylaw or his development application?
Yes, that's correct. Any in-stream applications would be unaffected by any new bylaws. However, since he's proposing a phased development, it's possible that future and subsequent phases may be, but it doesn't sound like there's going to be any conflict between the two. So for now, you're right. This is the current application would be for would be under the existing OCP, because it's in all likelihood the OCP, the new one, won't be approved until sometime in November. So obviously we wouldn't want to hold up the application further for that.
Follow-up question, if I may. Given the fact that he's falling under the grandfathered OCP, and according to OCP rules, unless I'm mistaken, if the zoning is in line with the OCP, you can forego a public forum on the matter. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. The council can opt to waive the public hearing if the proposed rezoning complies with the official community plan. I think that was on an earlier slide. So, and council again has done that in the past. It's really up to council. The other option is to, yeah, I think that's a good idea. Although it might be something that we can have available for people at the engagement of the official community plan too, because people ask questions sometimes in those forums.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but I personally don't see an issue with having this brought to for the public either.
Yeah, it's a pretty big application and it's a pretty big change for the community. You know, the potential for 33 lots, so 66 people, and the 43 RV lots, another 86 possible if you take 2 per. That's a lot of new people to town. So I think it would be wise to not waive the public hearing on this, because there'll be a lot of interest and a lot of questions that are very particular to the proposal. And that might help inform council as to any other conditions to impose at the time of subdivision as well. But you know, at the phase of rezoning to enable the project to proceed, you know, a public hearing would provide an opportunity really for public to express their views. They're pretty formal. They're not really interactive. It's an opportunity for the public to speak their mind and for council to hear. It's not a problem-solving forum. You know, if public wants to talk about things, it's better to do it in a council meetings rather than at a public hearing, because public hearings are by their nature not intended to be that interactive, where the developer answers questions or staff answer questions. We're really there to record interests. So, you know, there are probably some steps prior to that public hearing as well.
Well, I think it would also give the opportunity to put information out there in the future that would answer a lot of questions and maybe take away some of the negativity or some of the other questions that may come up in the future. So I think the more transparent it is, the better for the development.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I think, okay, this slide. So the current zoning right now is Forestry 1, and that provides for the list that you see there, including 1 single family dwelling, or on any lot greater than 2 hectares, 2 single family dwellings. So in fact, there's quite an asset increase in terms of value. We're going from probably about 25 hectares, assuming 20% of it is used for roads and other things, infrastructure, setbacks, etc. Park dedication, you know, we probably would end up with something like, I don't know, maybe 12, 10 lot, 10. So we're going from 10 single family dwellings to providing for 33, as well as the 43 lot RV park. So it's a big parcel of land. And it's a big boost in density, which is provided for in the Act, or in the OCP, and of course the zoning bylaw that if council chooses to support would also clarify the density. So that's the current zoning. Next slide, please. So there's another picture of the map. So the C2 zoning is the pink down here. Now, this is not the map that you'll see when you have the bylaw in front of you. The map that you'll see when you have the bylaw in front of you will not have that little square bitten out of it down at the bottom there. That square was taken out initially because there was some concern that if the pub was to go there, that the zoning didn't provide for that, or the marine gas station, or any of the other services that that the applicant had in mind. The applicant has since decided to resubmit a map at the time of the actual bylaw hearing and readings to show that that area would be included as part of the commercial 2 zoning, and then the remainder would be R1. So the commercial 2 is the RV park, the pub, and the marine gas station. And then the R1 would be all of the residential lots. Next slide, please. So there's a number of benefits to this proposal. Of course, user fees is one of them. There's the opportunity to negotiate community amenity contributions. That's something that's provided for in the Local Government Act, and it provides for the applicant to gift the community with an amenity commensurate with the value of the lift. So in other words, as I just mentioned, he's gone from being able to provide for 10 single family dwellings to 33 dwellings, as well as the 43 lot RV park. So quite a lift in terms of the value of the land asset and in terms of the opportunities to develop it. So there's an expectation that the applicant who applies to rezone and increase the density will provide an amenity. And that could include a number of things. It could include cash towards the construction of a second reservoir, water meters, further studies to establish conservation of water. I think we did talk at one point about there's a very popular fishing lookout at the bottom, and I guess we could go back to one of those maps and I could probably show you where it is. However, I think there is a 5% public land dedication that's required at the time of subdivision, so that's possibly something we can talk about later. But I have advised the applicant that my advice to council would be that if the council was going to take the trail, we would require it to be upgraded to BC Park standards, because otherwise the village would incur some liability for what's now a well-used public trail on private property. But if somebody were to trip, fall, have any kind of an event on there, then it would, we would be required to be responsible. So there generally, when there's a transfer of land for parks or trails, we require that they be upgraded to a safe standard as part of the condition of the gift. So that may not be on the table, but that's partly still in negotiations at this time. So next slide, please. So as Sydney Rankmore just went through the list of values expressed that have guided the new official community plan. Some of the most in the community plan, we heard that citizens express the importance of maintaining the small town feel of the village. They value wildlife, quiet living, appreciation of the natural environment. People want more growth to fund upgrades and replacement of water and sewer. We heard that in the OCP background report and also the public consultations. And citizens really want to see more things and more services, a store, a pub, tourism related supports. And those are all things that could be assisted to come to life through the process of this development. Next slide, please. Okay, well, this we've talked about this already, so we don't have that map at this point. So can we go to the next slide, please? I just want to remind you again what community amenity contributions are. We are required to negotiate them. They cannot be legislated as a condition of rezoning. They're intended to be negotiated. And the reason for that is because, first of all, they are intended to be a gift to the community. It's an expected gift, but a negotiated gift nonetheless. They should be commensurate with the values. So the applicant has the best idea of the value of the property, and so that's something that we wait to hear. It should benefit those who are affected by the increased density. So there's a sort of a nexus principle that it should be close by to whatever value is given. It should benefit the citizens affected, which in our case would be everybody, because the development of this size at that end of the community is likely to have an impact, not necessarily a negative or even tremendous, but it means that the community amenity is broad enough that it could encompass the entire community rather than just the neighborhood of the development. And it needs to be commensurate with the size and the scale of the development. Generally, they include things like parks, infrastructure, or cash. Those are the three big ones for most community amenities, for most land development projects. Next slide, please. So I just did a very poor and Class D estimate of what I think our benefits would be in terms of revenues. Of course, it's easy to calculate the water and sewer for the 33 lots. We have already those fees established in our fees and charges bylaw. That's what everybody pays. So that could be approximately something like somewhere near 150,000 from user fees and taxes. And I'll show you on the next slide how we came to these numbers, or how I did. And the RV park, well, we expect that we would collect from the RV park owner, since it's owned, rather than every individual property. That's also what we do in the mobile home park. There's not likely to be garbage service provided by ourselves, because the road will be a strata, and it's unlikely that, I don't know if the current service provider will be able to get up there, or if they'll have to create some other service. Taxes, again, I've used a comparative estimate from the current RV park in town in the nearby area, where using the BC assessment data to try and do some comparables. We really don't know what that will look like. But this is what we've been able to glean after discussing it a little bit with BC assessors. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of 200,000, but of course it'll be phased, it'll be over time. So those are great benefits to the community. Next slide, please. So just as a way of notes, the average house was valued at 900,000. It's just a round figure. We know those lots, some of them are going to be waterfront and they're going to be expensive on their own. And then you take the average house of, say, $300 per square foot. Again, these are very rough numbers. It's just an opportunity to show what the revenues could loosely look like. Same with the campground sewer fees and the campground water fees. We have those fees established already. Now, we don't know how much the campground will be open. We can talk a bit more about that later in terms of occupancy, because obviously council doesn't want them to be full-time occupancies. We don't want people living year-round in their RVs, or maybe council does, but right now the fees are calculated in the fees and charges bylaw by the number of stalls times the number of months, times the number of months divided by the number of months that they're open. So in this case, the applicant thinks they're going to be open year-round, so the motel rate would be $194.20 for each of those stalls. And similarly, the tax revenues for the RV pads, that's very difficult. I base that basically on the other RV park in town and working with BC assessors. So that's a bit of a shot in the dark. We don't really have it pinned down. We don't know what the revenues will be, but they're obviously going to be more than they were as a property that's zoned Forestry 1. Next slide, please. Now, here's the cruncher. Oh, is that the next one, or did we miss one? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So here, I just want to take you through the details. I know we go back and forth between cubic meters and how much water everyone uses, and there's a technical report in your binders and in fact, McElhaney has compiled 2 technical reports on the water. Here's the short and the long of it. The water treatment plant produces about 550 cubic meters a day. We right now operate at 10 liters per second. Now, there's no shortage of water coming off Newcastle Creek, so it's really the limiting number is the water treatment plant, which operates between 10 liters per second, which is our norm, and maximum of 20 liters per second. That's the max. So the reservoir stores about 1,300 cubic meters, so that gives us 1,850 cubic meters in terms of its capacity. Now, we know that we keep at least 80% of that, if we can, for firefighting during the hot days in the summer months. So it's not that we want to boil through 1,850 cubic meters a day. We, in fact, don't, but we're not entirely sure of what we use per day, and I'll tell you why in a minute. So the water treatment plant at 20 liters max and 10 liters is our general operation. Now, in terms of water use, the average Canadian uses about 334 liters per day. And when we do the math on that, it works out to be 102 cubic meters. Or if you then turn that back down to liters per second, it ends up that it would appear that the Village of Sayward users are managed to drink 3 times the Canadian average of water. So we know that's not true. What we suspect is that the system is leaking because it's the old asphalt concrete piping to deliver the water, probably built in the 60s. And of course, that concrete tubing doesn't flex, it doesn't move. And as the earth shifts around it, it can crack. And that's where the leaks come from. So we can assume that while the water uses are excessive, they're not entirely the responsibility of citizens to reduce and fix. So next slide, please. So basically what we found in the technical study was that the peak demand water use from the readings that they took, there were several readings that they took in July and August of 2020, and then in January of 2021, and that's shown as figure 1 in the technical report in your binders. And what that shows is that of the 1,850 cubic meter capacity on that day in August of 2020, the log sort used 12.4 liters per second. So when we add the 5.6 liters per second that households are using, along with that log sort use, it turned out that we were over or close enough to our capacity that we should worry. In fact, we came in, some of the other studies showed it at liters per second at just over 20 liters per second. So that's worrisome because even though it's only 2 days of the year, it's the 2 days that we would need to use firefighting equipment because they're the 2 hottest days. So that's the little nub of the problem. But you know, I think that there's options for us to move forward on this. So, but that, you know, for one thing, it's using all the water, and there'd be no room for any other land developer to come on stream. And also, we're spending an awful lot of money for what could be as much as 30% entering the ground of water that's treated and delivered and then lost. So that due to the aging infrastructure. So that's the demand pieces. Now, the maximum daily demand, as shown in the technical report by McElhaney, does come to 18.3, which seems fine. However, and maybe we can go back to the last slide. You'll see that of that 1803, really, we're not really sitting within our limits because we're using some of the 1850 that's stored in the reservoir. The reservoir itself only stores 1,300 and we're producing 550. So if we can go back to that next slide, you'll see that when we get close to the maximum daily demand, it's pretty tight. And I guess now one of the things that we did is we requested that the applicant cover the cost to hire an independent firm to evaluate the reports and particularly the water so that it was not seen to be biased in any way. And one of the observations made by Urban Systems, who did the review, was that generally you do not use storage capacity when calculating maximum daily demand and looking at your capacity. So that's a little bit of an oddity to use your storage capacity as part of the meeting the demands for the MDD, the maximum daily demand. Next slide, please. So just to sum up, we've got about 1,850 cubic meters, which is also expressed as liters per second. But when we look at the overall needs of this project, which are not huge, this particular project is only proposing to use 2.3 cubic meters out of the total 1,850. So it's not, this project is being overly consumptive of water. It's a combination of things. It's a combination of the log sort using so much water on those hot days, and it's a combination of the community using 3 times the Canadian average through no fault of their own, but through faulty and aging infrastructure. Next slide, please. So this is just a list of all the technical information we received that you've got in your binder. And next slide, please. There are a couple of concerns that council will want to think about and, you know, possibly come up with some ways to address. And if council approves this, it could be done at time of subdivision. There's some risk of law enforcement being taxed if people decide to occupy their RVs for permanent residencies. You know, we have those 2 provisions currently in the zoning bylaw that provide for up to 365 days when somebody's building a home, once a building permit's issued, and up to 90 days as an accessory use when somebody already has their primary use and they want to use an RV for family or for other residential purposes. So there is a possibility that people would occupy these year-round. And of course, we're seeing more and more of that. People are changing their living arrangements. It may be something that council's fine with. It is just, you know, I don't think that council should think of an RV park as something that's not going to generate any service requirements. So that could include first responders, of course, because there'll be medical responses, fire, and of course, if we have to enforce bylaw because of the occupancy, unless council's, you know, interested in seeing that discussed in a different way. We also should be careful, even though the road is going to be strata owned. In my experience, people don't always remember that, and when they aren't able to get the servicing done, or if it snows and they're not able to get it plowed, they get calls to the village because they don't always know who should I call. So, and the same with garbage. It's just important that the strata bylaws, when they're presented at time of subdivision, be really clear to address those 2 issues, because otherwise it could be a burden on the village to actually administer the complaints, really. We wouldn't have to complain, we wouldn't have to deliver on the surface, of course, pick up garbage and plow the roads, but we may have just something to be mindful of. It's not really a concern, it's just an awareness. Next slide, please. Yeah. So now, given all the water issues, I think I am recommending that staff consider approving it in principle. That would give the applicant some certainty that there's some support to go forward on the next steps. We are waiting for further discussion on an amenity, which of course there are many things that could be addressed through an amenity contribution. One, installing a flow meter at the water treatment plant would give us consistent daily readings that would show us how much water is leaving the system and when, which could be very helpful. A water meter procured and installed at the log sort would inform the village as to exactly how much water is being used. We know that there's a fair bit of water that's used for all kinds of things, including dust control in sometimes very ineffective ways. Because if it's windy and there's water going, it's not going to be addressing the dust. So in fact, in some ways, the village is subsidizing that operation by providing so much unregulated and unmetered water. So that's definitely something the village might want to talk about or council. The strata bylaws that could limit the RV occupancy at time of subdivision, that's again something to just put in the back of your mind or on the table somewhere for later. Cash donation could be negotiated with the applicant to cover some of these things. Water meter feasibility study, water use meters. We might, there could be cash towards a second water storage reservoir. In the best world, maybe we'd see the log sort contribute to that as well. But that would certainly assist in the firefighting concerns and also the water. The council could require, and in fact, I think should require that the project be phased, because if council were to improve all 33 lots, there'd be no room for any other landowner to join on the system. Council could consider any public land dedication to be upgraded to BC best practices so that there's no trade-off in liability that comes to the village. Now, those things are easily identified and fairly easily done by hiring park planners who will design the standards, and then of course somebody would have to build them. I think there's a whole bunch of tools that we can look at to cover the costs for the upgrades, but maybe we can get that on the next slide, please. So basically, another option is a feasibility study to determine the best way to upgrade the water and sewer priorities. We know that there are leaks. We don't know where they are and how significant they are. So it's possible that we could work with a feasibility study to look at ways to upgrade the water and sewer system so that there would be less loss of water. And in fact, one of the things that's really interesting is almost all jurisdictions across Canada that have installed water meters have seen a 35 to 50% reduction in water consumption. Not because people are paying more, but rather because they're using less, because less is leaked out to the system. So there's lots of benefits for that. Also, the local government provides for a number of tools for local governments to finance infrastructure. The development cost charges bylaw is one. In that case, we would calculate all the expenses that were needed to pay for this new infrastructure, whether it's upgrades or whether it's a new reservoir. And then that would be divided back, and every property owner who bought a land in the town or developed it would have to pay that either at the time of subdivision or at the time of building permit. Another option in the local government is latecomer fees. That's in Section 508 of the Local Government Act, which provides for either the developer to pay for it or the village to pay for it through municipal financing, and then charge it back to everybody who comes along. So for example, in this case, if the applicant were to invest in some infrastructure, let's say a water reservoir, then what would happen is every new landowner would have to pay the village at the time of either subdivision or building permit, in which case then we would pay back the developer, or we would pay the amount, and then everybody who joins on would pay it at the time of subdivision and building permit, one of those other. And then there's also something in the local government called a requirement for excess or extended services, where a government can direct that in order to achieve the rezoning, the developer must pay for certain things. This happens in some bigger areas where there's a whole unserviced area where a property owner might bring on this whole piece of land, and a requirement is to extend the services for that area and other areas. And so then they would be required to do that, and then either get the latecomer fees later, or they would just service their own development. So there are a number of tools in the Local Government Act that provides for financing for infrastructure. And so there's a number of ways to address the water issue. And so I think if council was in support of this proposal and wanting to go ahead with it tonight, you could provide approval in principle, so that we could firm up these options and determine how best to proceed. Now, and also, of course, with the applicant being phased to reduce it down to 10 lots, that also reduces the water requirements by 1/3. So it does give us a bit more of a window so that the developer could get some work done this year. And then we would have to proceed with some of this other stuff. Now, of course, the village has an interest in seeing the leaks plugged as well. So there's lots of different ways to shift the responsibility on this, but I think that's the information I was hoping to provide, and I'd like to ask the applicant, Mr. Adama, if he'd like to add anything at this point.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
Yeah, just want to correct you there, Ann. When we talked about phasing out some lots, we would phase out 10 lots, not down to 10. So basically on the north part, we would, I think we would eliminate 3 lots from that side. And then on the other side, the south side, which is above the RV park, we'd be eliminating 10 lots there. So this would be eliminating 13 lots from the proposed 31 lots. And then, of course, lot 1 and 2 down below, well, lot 2 is a parking lot, so it wouldn't take any water either. So we, we still have phased it down, so there's less water usage, allowing other people to come in and build, and then, like Ann says, the sort, which we had McElhaney do all these studies, and they've although we don't know the exact amount, they've come up with the figure as much as 60% of the water that's going through your reservoir is being used on the sort. So a water meter would certainly tell that for sure. But other than that, you've covered off everything pretty good there, Ann. And as far as amenities, that would be something we work on. And I know you need money for your infrastructure, that's for sure.
Thanks. Can I ask staff to bring us back to the map that shows in the PowerPoint that shows the lots, so that we can make it really clear what's proposed here? I'm sorry, this just happened today where we discussed this with Mike, and he's dropped back some lots. So Melissa, if you could please bring up the map in the PowerPoint again. We could show that map that shows the lots that is being proposed to be changed. Okay, so I think it's the fourth one down there. Fourth slide in. Ah, great, thank you. Okay, so Mike.
That's the south side, above the RV park. So on that part, we would be, I guess you don't see my cursor, do you? No. Anyway, so
but you can tell us the lot numbers with the road A, B, and C, maybe?
So lots number, I can tell you that if you can see them on yours. And then lot 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 would all along that one road there, we would not build, as well as lots 17, 18, 19, and 20, and 3. And then on the north concept part, which is on the other side of the Salmon Bay Road, there's 3 lots over there that we're deleting as well for now.
And council, we'll make sure that if council decides to proceed, we'll be providing an actual map for the bylaw, and the bylaw, of course, will be quite detailed in terms of provisions.
So down, as Ann had said, lots 1 and 2, which we propose putting a pub on lot 1, which is bordering the pavement and the start of the gravel road going up. So lot 1 would be the pub. Lot 2 would be all parking. And parking is quite a problem there right now in that whole area. So that would take off quite a few vehicles up there. And then where we have the IR zoning, well, that now is all into C2 zoning, and that's where we would put the fuel for the marina and maybe a little store to service the boats and their supplies, mainly, you know, towards the marine people. And yeah, the RV park, we say 43 slips, but probably realistically it may be more like 40. We may widen them out a bit, as well as we're talking about putting roofs over some of them. We've got, I think I sent Ann some of those pictures. I had an architect do a concept of what it would all look like with roofs on, and I think for some of the people that like to stay for maybe 6 months or so, rather than being out in the elements of the heat and the rain and whatnot, the roofs would be they're quite tasteful to look at, and it'd be quite nice up there actually. As far as the strata roads, McElhaney has advised that I go with strata rather than the government roads, allowing us to achieve a little bit steeper grades up to 12%, which is really nothing in a subdivision. It's not hard to drive up 12% with fire trucks or ambulances or anything like that.
Is that, so, sorry to interrupt, Mike, is that what the current elevation of that road is now? That grade?
It only when you first drive up there, that's 12%. When you first leave the Salmon Bay main line, that's 12%. That will be knocked down once we move the road to where it's going. But this what it does, it allows for a little narrower road and a little steeper road. That's what strata does. There's places in Nanaimo, I don't know if you know, along Long Lake, in behind Long Lake, the roads are so steep, it's incredible. They actually have heated all of the roads so that the people can get up them in the wintertime and down them. So it's not an uncommon thing to strata the roads, and it just gives us a bit more flexibility doing that. And so we would use, there's local contractors here in Sayward that plow roads, and we would use them. And whether we worked with you guys, paid some of the garbage. We'd use the same garbage trucks and that, but of course we would be paying that. So other than that, it would just be typical. And of course, we would be, the strata would be responsible, just like in a condominium setup or anything. There's a certain amount of money is put away and for road repair, but it's going to be all paved. So I see very little road repairs happening, but things do happen. Lighting, same thing with lighting. The strata puts the lights up, but of course, hydro, that's all monitored by a hydrometer.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. CAO, is there anything else you wanted to add? Sorry, you're muted.
Sorry about that. No, that's it for now, unless there are specific questions. You know, I think it was important to bring it forward so that council had some opportunity to give a yay or nay early on before the applicant invests any more time and money on his proposal, and to enable him to proceed to the next phase, which would be working out through some of the details on the water if council's prepared to go that route.
Well, some of the questions that I have is regarding the traffic impact. I can see with our, single lane going back and forth and having 40 RV sites as well, I can see that traffic increasing quite a bit. And I'm not sure if the studies address that adequately. Also, I'm concerned the roofs over the RVs and for extended stays. So we're looking at possibility of having to change a bylaw again, because you're looking at having people there for 6 months plus a year out of a year. Is that not correct, Mr. Adamo?
It's something that we've looked at. I did do a traffic study on the RV park and gave it to Anne, and it's actually surprisingly little. We look at what the neighboring RV park does there, and those vehicles just stay 3-4 months at a time, and he's booked up 3 years in advance with the same people. They just stay there. It's actually, RVs hardly ever move, and it's surprising. I don't think traffic is an issue, but I did it on a weekly study. What I gave, the numbers I gave to Anne, and it showed 6 vehicles a day leaving if they only stayed a week, and so that's it's not a lot.
6 vehicles really. A day. Sorry,
yes.
6 vehicles a day out of 43 RV sites.
That's right. If they're staying between 1 and 2 weeks at a time, but a lot of these guys stay for months. They just love it here. They really do. They love to go fishing and crabbing, and they just hang out, right? So that's the kind of people that are, seem to like it here.
Okay. Also, I was concerned with the reservoir being the only option for water, and sorry, CAO, and for Mike, it seemed like it was present. Sorry.
One of the things that we've talked about, we've with McElhaney a lot. Of course, if we didn't bring the firefighting water into the situation, there's more water than you'll ever use, and that creek's has a lot of volume as well. But what we could do is put a reservoir up on our property just for fire, and that's something that it'd be very expensive to do, and you can't contaminate your drinking water system with it. But it would be have to be a separate water line that fed the fire hydrants, and so that, and then there would be you know, because the firefighting water takes more than the residential consumption does. And so we'd really be in good shape if we did that. It's just an option. It's something that we have to look at and see which is the best way, because right now firefighting water is all treated. And, you know, it doesn't need to be treated. And also if the Western Forest Products, you know, apparently they may even have a second water system from what I understand, but I don't know that for sure. But if they did, you know, we would gain a lot of water from there, because like I said, they're using as much as 60% of the water. You know, the way they do it for dust control, it purges onto that sort all day long. You'll see it, the sort's always wet, you know, and rightly so. They need to keep the dust down, as well as they sprinkle their logs. So they do use a lot of water. And so between those things alone, we, you know, and like Ann says, if you're leaking water in your old system, you know, there's lots of avenues to get the water down, that's for sure.
Thank you. Councillor Tinsley, you were next. You're muted.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question. As we're all aware, the community has major restrictions currently on water. Is there an opportunity to look at something even smaller than what you're talking about here, in terms of either RV smaller or home smaller, anything like that?
You're saying less RV pads and less homes?
You're muted again. You're muted, Councillor Tinsley.
I'm sorry. I'm saying smaller in whatever way, based on the crunch that we all recognize of our current restrictions on water supply, infrastructure, things like that.
Well, as we talked earlier here, Ann and I worked out, and I've deleted 13 lots.
Yes, yes,
out of that
yeah. No, I
to
understand
have
that number, and I understand the RV lots. But you know, we're all dealing with a community that is up against the wall around water. And so I'm asking, is there an opportunity to reduce significantly in one or both of these areas the amount that you're applying for at this current time?
Well,
and I recognize that affects things like commercial development and things like that. Those are whole other questions. But right now we have a big animal in our room, which is our current infrastructure and our water supply. And
well,
I'm looking to address that and appease you. And
yeah,
I credit you for your development skills and wanting to improve the properties. We all want to do that, right? So we've got to work together.
that's right. And I think where we're going with all this is, you know, we've cut some lots out, and we get down to, you know we have enough water there now, because, you know, McElhaney's done all that. And then as soon as we start, then we'll be starting to contribute towards getting your water system better, you know, and putting out more volume, and or, you know, or at least retaining some of it that's lost, right?
Okay, Councillor Paulson. You're muted.
I thought I was all ready to go. First of all, Mike, I'd like to thank you very much for your presentation tonight. And I'd also like to recognize your perseverance and persistence over the last 15 months. And thank you also for getting on to the work at hand since February, and all of the remediation things that you needed to get accomplished. So I'd like to commend you on doing that.
Thank you.
the two biggest issues that I see here are, as it says in the report, the water and the traffic. And I don't believe that these two issues are only related to you putting in your development. They're multi-pronged, and the traffic down in that area now is very congested, and it's the congestion comes from the people that go to work using the waterways and parking their trucks and vehicles there. It's used by the fishermen that use the small craft harbor. And so I don't think that we need to place all of the onus on you to correct these things. I think we have to look at all the different aspects of it. And I do believe that Sayward Road is part of the Ministry of Transportation and Highways. And so I think they need to be involved too in some of the things that need to be done along Sayward Road to make it a better place to access and easier for the tourists and residents and workers that are having to access that place. I can guarantee you from being down there that over the summer that any parking lot that you make is going to be full to overflowing within half a day. So that, one parking lot is not going to resolve the problems. It's a much bigger problem than just your development going into. And as for the water, I feel the same way about that. The usage of the water by Western Forest Products could easily be alleviated by having a separate water line with unpotable water or untreated water being used, rather than having all of this treated water going through the system. And you just brought up a very important point about the firefighting water. It shouldn't be going through the treatment plant. As a taxpayer, I think that's an incredible waste of our taxpayer dollars, and the infrastructure crumbling is certainly a responsibility of the whole community. It's certainly it needs to be fixed and upgraded so that water isn't being wasted and the land being eroded and taken apart. So I think these two issues need a little bit more investigation and involving the different people, the different businesses and people that affect the traffic volumes and the use of the water and the wastage that we're experiencing now, even before your development has come on board. So those are just a few of my things. I was really impressed with your information that you put forward, and I wish you all the best in success with this development. I think it's a huge improvement to Sayward, and looking forward to working with you over the following years.
Well, thank you, Sue. I'd like to address your concern about the traffic. Of course, I drive there every day, so you're absolutely right what goes on there. And so Roger, who has, he's got
Yes.
11 acres here, and he's got the old ferry slip. We've talked about that a lot. So we, once we get working along the strip there, to begin with, we talked about putting, it would require a bylaw from the village. If we could get the vehicles off the street and then we could get them into pay parking on Rogers property there. They do that in Cole Harbor, they do that in Port McNeill, they do it everywhere, there's not, to pay a nominal fee to park your vehicle when they're gone into camp or fish farms or wherever for weeks on end. So that's one of the things we're looking at to, get the vehicles off the road and give them a place to park.
Good. Thank you, Councillor Craig.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I don't need to repeat anything Councillor Paulson said. I agree with all of it. I would like to confirm, though, that I spend an enormous amount of time down at the wharf working for Mowi. And I will confirm that Dan and Linda Fear have year-round campers there. They just they separate themselves into 3 different seasons. You have the winter spring season campers, and they're all the same people. The summer fall campers, which are all the same people, and then the early winter campers. And yeah, they come in and out 6 times a day. I would confirm with that. What I do actually have some questions on is on page 83 of this council report that we all have in front of us. On the very top line, it says water use readings taken by the applicant's agent at McElhaney in July and August of 2020 and January 2021 show that aside from the log sort use of the water, the average household water is approximately 3 times the national average of household use. So it was your agents, not our own agents, that discovered the leaks in our own water system, which is 3 times the average use. So if our leaks were plugged up in our own water system, that would improve the water usage. I just did my own basic calculations on the calculator, down to about 6.5 liters per second per day at maximum usage. So it seems to me that the biggest problem that we have is not the log sort, it's not your development, it's the leaks in our own water system. Now, if you go down to the middle of the section where I've got it all highlighted yellow there, it says, as a result, water is a problem that needs to be addressed. Council may wish to request the following to address this under a community amenity contribution. Each one of these things says cash, 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 cash. And it looks like we're asking Mr. O'Donnell to either build us a second water storage reservoir or asking him to install water meters at the log sort, which I believe is a Western Forest or a village issue, or to support procurement and installation of a flow meter or cash from underwater capacity assessment. So the question that I have here is, in the resolution that we have, is to approve in principle, subject to the applicant returning with details of an offered community amenity contribution. If the applicant chooses, and because it does say it needs to be negotiated, not required, if the applicant chooses not to build us a water storage reservoir and instead chooses to do the firefighting water reservoir, is it the intention of this council to deny his application, which I think is wholly unfair? Thank you.
CAO, you have your hand up and you're unmuted.
Oh, thank you. Well, I had my hand up until I heard the question. The question was to council, but I think just as background for Councillor Craig, we're trying to work together to come up with some options. We're not imposing an obligation, and we're not leaving him in the dark to try and figure it out on his own. These are some options that would help. And obviously the community has some work to do on its own, and cash contribution as part of the community amenity could help with that. And I think if you can go back to my PowerPoint, the last couple slides that talked about the provisions for financing services in the Local Government Act, again, that's to give him some guidance as to what we're looking for, and you know, what we would negotiate. It's really up to council and the applicant to negotiate, not up to council to say, no, you can't do this, or no, you have to do this. It's up to us to work together and come up with a solution.
I don't believe there's anybody on council that does not want to see this development take place. I think everybody's very excited about it. I mean, growth is the only way that we're going to survive. It's our future. So thank you very much, Mr. Adama. for
Thank you.
everything that you presented tonight.
Okay.
Is there anybody else that has any questions or comments before we wrap this up?
No, I don't have, I just got a comment, Mr. Mayor. A good pat on the back for Mr. Adamo. Thank you
Thank you, Norm.
for at least
Great.
trying.
No, it will
All
be
right,
successful.
That is what I've said all along for this whole project, and especially because it does fall under your OCP. You know, I want to work with all you guys and any visions that you guys have. You know, this isn't my forte, but you know, I'm open to hear any suggestions for sure, and I understand. You know, I will contribute, you know, to your infrastructure one way or another, that's for sure. So we just got to figure out how and whatnot. So we just need to know that we got the support of everybody to go move forward, and then that will be the next step to figure out how we're going to do it.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. So the recommended resolution, the council receives a staff report and PowerPoint. Do I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
discussion? Opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. Second is that the council provide approval in principle on the application to rezone, subject to the application returning, or the applicant returning, pardon me, with details of an offered community amenity contribution to, or details to phase the development in order to address the water issue. Do I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second? Discussion? Opposed?
Sorry.
Hearing none.
Wait a minute,
Sorry.
wait a minute.
Councillor Tinsley?
Sorry, I'm opposed. I don't believe there's, like, in principle, does that cover everything? Like, it says details of community amenity contribution or details of phased-in development. I'm not comfortable with that. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I want to work with Mr. Adamo. We all are talking the same talk, but in principle, we're looking at, yes, community contributions and details relative to a phased-in development order. And I would actually add development cost charges, potentially, right? Based on the amount of proposed development. I'm sorry, I'm Mr. Cautious.
Nope.
We
No,
are a
that's good.
community
That's
with
fine.
limited water supply, an aging water system. That's exactly why I asked Mr. Adamo, thank you again for your great work and presentation, but about the dynamic of flexibility on both sides, because what affects your development affects us, and we have to move forward, in my opinion, in a small way. And I need that reflected in a principle of accepting the application. That's my
So
two
what-
bits.
So what amendment are you looking for, Councillor Tinsley?
I'm looking at the community amendment contribution and details to phase the development in order to address the water issue and potential development cost charges. And I know nobody likes to talk about money, but
Nope.
money is what's going to drive the infrastructure here, and money is going to drive whether Mr. Adamo, with his great work, is going to be able to do his development. And we're in it together.
Yeah, so the projected DCC. Okay.
Yes. Well,
CAO,
no, projected, including DCCs or potential DCCs. Whatever you want to talk about, this community has not had those before. And Mr. Adamo knows this, we all know this. We have a major structural issue, sewer and water, and we have to work together to, yes, meet development opportunities, as Mr. Adamo has showed so well he wants to move forward on, but I think we have to have a very fine balance between the two. Otherwise, we are at risk.
Thank you. CAO, you have your hand up? You're
Thank
on
you.
mute.
Yeah, I'm off now, thanks. I agree that there's more steps. I'm not sure development cost charges is the option that council will choose. There's a number of different tools. That's one of them. But so to put it in the motion is a little binding. I agree that, you know, that the other thing is that the work forward is going to cost some money for the applicant. And I think it would be helpful for him to know that he had some support, which is why, you know, there's the agreement in principle. Now, he doesn't have any authority until you actually do the readings and adopt a bylaw. So if that's any comfort for Councillor Tinsley, that by giving approval in principle, it gives him some reassurance that if we can address the issues, then there's support for the project. But it doesn't give him the zoning at this point. It doesn't give him any legal rights.
Thank you. I appreciate your description and the in principle. If you believe that covers the application, then I have no problem with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Craig?
Yeah, I'd like to call a point of order. We were actually in the middle of the voting process. The discussion period had ended, and with respect to Councillor Tinsley, we were in the middle of a voting process and some votes were taken, and Councillor Tinsley objected. I'd like to finish the voting process with the conclusion of it, please.
By all means. So opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. Thank you very much, Mr. Adama, for all your time tonight.
Well, thank you guys all for your good input, and we'll continue to work together to solve these problems we have, and we'll get there.
Sounds good. You have a good night, sir.
Good night.
Sorry, CAO, you have your hand up?
Thank you. I just wanted to remind before we adjourn that we have an in-camera meeting proposed for tonight.
Yes.
Thank you.
So number 12, reserve fund establishment bylaw number 476, 2021. The recommended resolution that the reserve fund established 2021 be giving fourth and final reading. Do I have a motion, please?
So
I'll
moved.
move that.
Second.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Discussion? CAO? You have your hand up?
Sorry about that. Sorry.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. Number 13, new business. There is none. 14, public question period. The purpose of public question period is to permit the people in the gallery, which would be whoever's online, to ask about issues discussed by council during the meeting. Speakers will be allowed to ask one question each if time permits, and they have the opportunity to ask a second question. Speakers will be allowed to ask a second question. Said that already. For the record, they would state their name and address, and giving the meeting is held electronically. Any questions you have would be submitted in writing in advance of the meeting. And if not, do we still have a member of the public online?
We do.
Do we have any
Yes,
questions
yes.
from the member? And I'm sorry, who am I speaking to?
Sorry, Mayor. We have Angie Hayward on as guest. I haven't seen her show an indication. We don't know, Angie, if you're there.
Yes, I'm here. I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we are going to be going into camera in accordance with section 92 of the community charter. This council meeting will be closed to the public at this time in order for council to give consideration to matters in accordance with section 90-1C of the community charter to discuss labor relations or other employee relations as per section 90-1E, an acquisition of expropriation, I can't even speak anymore, of the land or improvements. Council to be considered to closure could be reasonably expected to the harm of the interest of the municipality. We are now in camera. Pardon me. And then the adjournment that the regular meeting for council September 7th, 2021 be adjourned. Do I have a motion, please?
I move.
Second,
I'll second that.
discussion? Opposed? Sorry, CAO, you have your hand up?
Sorry, Mayor Baker, I was wondering if we were going to take a break between this meeting and the next. Sorry, wrong time to put my hand up.
It's okay, thank you. So opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. This meeting is now done. So we will take a 5-minute break. So if